you have to be very careful about who you hire in terms of culture fit when you're working remote. One of the definitions of culture is what do employees do when nobody's looking? And that's kind of key here when it comes to like remote hires. You have to really nail who you hire. So you have to be extra careful around the culture component because you have to trust when people are at home what they're doing.
It's Makeship COO and co-founder Pablo Eder. Makeship, a crowdfunding platform founded in 2018 with a mission of helping the world transition to the creator economy. Pablo has many years of experience in science, engineering, and business, having launched multiple startups. He's a Mexican-German who had lived most of his early life in Mexico. He immigrated to Canada on a startup visa with goals of launching his entrepreneurial career while attending school in Ontario. Pablo had a desire to become an entrepreneur from a very young age. His first venture, launched in 2013, was a 3D printing software automation company called Lani. From there, Pablo started Dorada Consulting, a firm focused on machine learning and blockchain. In 2018, he began his third venture, Bounty, a crowdfunding platform for influencers to fund content ideas. Pablo joined Makeship as a co-founder in 2019 and is now the chief operating officer. He manages the company's design, operations, and technology teams. In his free time, Pablo loves to go for bike rides or rock climbing. Pablo is also fluent in English, German, and Spanish. Pablo, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Hi, Cameron. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you've got a really, really intriguing background from, clearly like the Mexico, the German component. So you bring in like European and the Latin America side. But then where were you at school in Ontario? Were you at like Waterloo?
I went to Waterloo, yeah.
Yeah. Waterloo is, for any of our American friends, Waterloo would be like the Stanford of tech in Canada. So you were a techie from an early age then?
Yeah, I think so. I when I was 15, I was spending a lot of time repairing computers, and that's how I would make some money. So yeah, I think I've always been a big techie.
Okay, and then you've had a couple of businesses that you built along the way that brought you to where you are now. What lessons did you kind of glean there that you carry with you today?
I think for my first business, I wasn't asking enough from my customers. Like customers would ask me to do a lot of things, and I would stretch myself very thin because I didn't know how to set up boundaries, and I didn't know how to like ask for more money. I was, I think, like 19 or 20. And I think that I wasn't really sure about how to find the right product market fit where customers actually really want your product. So the dynamics really change versus when people really don't want your product and you're willing to do more. I think from my first startup, I learned that. And from the following startups, I learned a little bit more about, unit economics, hiring people, that kind of stuff, more operational stuff.
Interesting on the whole having boundaries and saying no and asking for more money. Like I've never actually heard anyone say that, and you're bang on with that. Can you give us some examples of when you should have said no or when you should have created more boundaries, what that means?
Yeah, I had a client that was one of the first customers. So they kept requesting more and more personalized software solutions. At some point, I said, well, for us to really be able to afford that, we have to charge you this much. And they said, no, you're crazy. We're not paying you that much. And I still went ahead and developed the features because I said it's so important for us to have this large client. And it ended up being a bad idea. Like right now, the way I see it is I'd rather have 10 small clients than one client that is 10 times their size, because out of those 10, you learn a lot more, and you learn what all those 10 want in common is the real value of your company versus someone else treating you kind of like a consultant. If someone else treats you like a consultant, they're just going to request something that is like the problem solution is really truly specific. Versus if you get 10 customers that are smaller, you really understand what's valuable about what you're offering.
I love when you're kind of giving that explanation of these clients that are asking for more, and then when you tell them the price, they run away. I've said for years that Microsoft could have built Microsoft Excel with maybe 50 features, and that could have been it forever, and we all would have been perfectly fine with it. Like 99.9% of the people, that's all we ever needed. But I'm sure they've got thousands of people still working on Microsoft Excel doing shit that no one actually ever needs.
Exactly. And I think it's probably consequential to the first thing. It's like now Microsoft Excel is so big and so useful that they have to have every feature because they need to cover every single business case. Mm-hmm. And because it scales so well, right? Like they build this feature, it will grow to the next 10 versions of Microsoft. In fact, they don't even sell you by versions, right? You buy it as a subscription.
Right.
So now you're committed to the features in a way that it would be difficult for a competitor. But that's why the competitors don't even focus on the features. They focus a lot more in compatibility, many users working at the same time, that kind of stuff. They just tackle a different angle. and customer type.
So what kind of a decision filter do you use to know when to listen to the customer and take their suggestions and run with them, or when to listen to the customer and say, thank you, but we're not taking those? Like, how do you decide?
I think really money. There's this like startup concept of like being really guerrilla style when it comes to requesting features. So instead of saying, would you like this feature, which inevitably says yes, you really ask, what is the problem that you're currently having and how can this solution solve it better? And then you say, okay, we can solve this problem at this price point. And then they can really argue whether or not they want it. There was this lesson from, who was it? I believe it was Stripe, who was asking people, would you like to use our software? And whenever they said yes, they would immediately charge them and install it on their computers personally. They would say, can you pass me your laptop? And that type of like really aggressive, okay, let's really prove if you're interested by charging you or by interacting immediately with it and cornering you in that way, I think give you really good results, because it kind of is the opposite of like the mom test where, you know, like your mom will always love everything you make.
Right.
But if you actually ask people to use it, they might change their minds or to charge more importantly.
I've been to 62 countries. I've been to 34 countries in the last 4.5 years. I feel like a complete idiot when I travel the world because I only speak English and I can speak French like a toddler. I want to ask you a question that I hope you receive it in the right way because I'm quite intrigued. You're really smart. And in Latin America, I'm a moron. Like I run through, you know, everything south of Mexico. They only speak Spanish with the exception of Brazil where they speak, you know, Portuguese. But you've got an accent. And North Americans have a heavy bias. How do you work around that bias to quickly show them that the accent means nothing, that you have the intellect and the capacity?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because it doesn't always work, right? I think there's certain circles where they see foreigners kind of like as a positive, you know, like in Waterloo, they had very smart people as international students.
Yeah.
So they associated accents with kind of like being smart. But when I go to other places, I get treated very differently. Spanish is also an interesting one. There's not that many Mexicans in Canada versus in the US.
Right.
So again, Canadians don't assume that my accent has the same implications as in the US or in California. So I don't know how to get around it, honestly. I think that, yeah, I've had definitely bad experiences. I've definitely had good experiences. And it's definitely something that people identify you by and something that people notice and point out. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I think it's like anything else. People treat you in a certain way, and you have to learn to prove them differently if it's a negative connotation.
Because I'll tell you what I'm learning in Europe is in Europe, everybody has an accent to everybody else because there's so many different, like, it doesn't matter which coffee shop you're in, you're hearing 4 other languages constantly. There's no kind of normal Ontario accent or normal, you know, Chicago accent. Like that doesn't exist. When you went to school at Waterloo, and how many years ago was that you were there? A decade?
I got there, yeah, 12 years ago, 2010.
Okay. When you left there and were kind of starting out into your business career, what did you pull out of that classic kind of tech education that you still use to, you know, today in your role? And then I want you to talk to me a little bit about Makeship as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think Waterloo is a really good school for coming up with ideas and trying things out. I think what makes it different is that you have co-ops, so you have to work every 4 months or something like that. You have to work at a company or do something. And I think that really teaches you to get really good at building things or testing things. I think what I learned from Waterloo was really kind of just go out and try it type mentality. And that's obviously very useful for startups. As startups get bigger and bigger into more mature companies, it becomes a little bit less useful and almost in some cases bad. Like there's certain lessons that I have to like kind of like unlearn or certain things that I have to like change, I guess. But it's very useful, you know, sub 20 employees. It's very useful.
Yeah, it makes sense. Did you hire out of that Waterloo today? Like, is that something you lean back on and you look for that as a pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we hire very strongly from Waterloo. My co-founder went to Queens, so I would say that Waterloo and Queens are probably our 2 top hires, just because of the people you know, right? At the beginning, a startup hires based on your network, and that's why you end up hiring a lot like that.
Was he Queens Engineering?
Yeah.
I hired a lot of people. I actually hired Kimball Musk out of Queens Engineering, Elon's brother, in 1993. For real, I hired him to work for me at College Pro Painters, and I hired his cousin, Peter Reeve, who built Solar City also.
Yeah, Elon went to Queens as well, right? I think physics.
Yeah, they're wickedly smart. So you got involved in the blockchain at a time when blockchain wasn't that sexy, you know, I mean, it was sexy in terms of it being tech, but nobody knew what the hell it was in 2017, 18.
I think that I saw a lot of interesting things just because I got into blockchain, in 2012 or 2013. I can't remember, one of those years. My roommate, who used to be my boss at some point, but he was my roommate at the time, we decided to really get into crypto, and we turned off the furnace in winter, which you can imagine is a crazy decision. And instead we put miners, like Bitcoin miners, in the basement, just producing the heat. We still have the furnace for certain temperatures, but we're able to kind of like lower the minimum temperature. And that was a really cool experience, right? Because I got into Bitcoin when it was like $30 per Bitcoin. I got out when it was like not very expensive, maybe $1,000. So I never really sold it for like millions of dollars, but I thought it was crazy that it went from $30 to $1,000. And then from that experience, what I saw kind of like the next generation with Ethereum and distributed computing with crypto was a lot of people developing interesting applications. And the interesting one in 2017 was a lot of companies were trying to diversify or fundraise utilizing those ICOs, which I thought was a very, very interesting concept and very great area. Like a lot of them, you could really argue around securities and regulation. So I was very interested. And the first thing I did was like set up a lot of meetings with securities lawyers. So when I was doing consulting, I was working with tons of law firms around securities, both obviously in the US and Canada. Canada is tricky because the regulation of security is done provincially as opposed to federally. So I had to work with a lot of those. But I thought it was really interesting. I thought there were two like big database moments in 2017. One of them being blockchain, another one, a lot of companies were trying to like figure out, is there an AI play with our large data sets? So they were either trying to make their data more open through blockchain and find a solution there, or they were trying to make it a little bit more processed and algorithmic through AI. So I thought they were very interesting concepts.
It's intriguing, interesting. So, and have you ever decided to get back into Bitcoin since the $1,000 moment?
Obviously, then there was like NFTs and what's going on with that, which I mean, they're very old. Like in 2017, we're also already looking at those types of non-fungible contracts. But I think it's interesting from the perspective that there's a lot of smart people working on it, but I still haven't found applications that I find are practical enough or interesting enough for me to be like, okay, there's something really extremely valuable here. I think when I was doing consulting, I was doing it mostly just as a result of trying something new and figuring out why are so many people interested in Ethereum and why are people so interested in what's going on with the centralized applications. But when it comes to like me personally, I just haven't used it yet, right? Like I don't use any applications with crypto. I still find it super cool from the perspective of sending value around the world. I still think that there's this interesting gap where there's no efficient way of sending someone like $2.
Yeah.
Like I cannot send you $2 in any practical way. It's always going to cost more than $2 or sub $2. I think there's something there in terms of like moving value around and that value being decentralized, but I'm very skeptical about whether or not crypto can really scale and remain decentralized.
I love that you're playing in such huge areas. And we actually had the second in command for blockchain.com as a guest on our second in command podcast.
Nice.
It's interesting that you're playing and thinking in such a big area. How do you prevent or allow that thought to stay within the business that you're building? And how do you restrain yourself to stay focused on what needs to get done? Like, how do you pull yourself down from that 30,000 foot level to the, let's get shit done as well?
Yeah, I think because naturally I'm very let's get shit done type person. And the other part is kind of more like philosophical, like kind of like what I find cool. So it's like one part of you is like, I find this cool. And another part of you is like, oh shit, in order to move to the next step, I have to do this. Again, these are the type of stuff that I'm actually trying to like unlearn now, because we're getting to like about 70 employees at Makeship. And I cannot just get shit done now because the company requires so much structure and so many decisions being made. And so instead I have to like learn how to like, pass tasks to other people, decentralize, scope better, all this like organizational stuff that I never really did. So yeah, I think right now it's more like going back into like strategy and vision and less into like getting stuff done. So I'm actually trying to like unlearn getting stuff done just because it's causing other issues, like it's tricky.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us a bit about Makeship and also give us some of the scope in terms of like the size of the organization. How many people are we working with, et cetera?
Yeah, like I said, we're about 70 people. What's interesting is that we were only 2 people at the beginning of 2020. And we pretty much did all of that without fundraising or like without a significant amount of fundraising at all. So we're one of the few companies in Canada that we grew like 40x in less than 3 years without outside funding. So I find that to be rare, and especially rare in a company like ours, which I guess I haven't described, but Makeship makes physical products for typically influencers and video game studios. The reason we work with them is that we find them to be a super, super fascinating market because they have this interesting problem where when you post a video on YouTube or a video game on Steam, you have super, super interesting unit economics where you don't know how many people are going to download your game. So it could be one person or a million people. You don't know how many people are going to watch your Instagram post or your YouTube video. It could be one or a million. And the platforms will not charge you more money if it's one or a million. So you have like in some way like infinite supply and on demand. So because you have these like insane market dynamics where demand supply curve never really cross in this traditional sense, or you don't know what to expect. You don't know your ability to sell product. It's very difficult. And you're typically a team of one or two. You have this like super small niche team with insane unit economics that wants to make a physical product. Well, good luck. Like it's super hard because if you try to manufacture it, you have to go to some sort of factory, order the units, put them in a warehouse. And again, you don't know how many units you're going to sell. So what Makeship is trying to solve is giving creators, especially emerging independent, thinkers, an ability to make products as if they were a large team. So we're trying to like maximize what they're capable of doing that. And the only solution that we figure to make this into something where we can de-risk it is through crowdfunding. So essentially, you launch a product on Makeship, Makeship makes it, designs it, does customer support, logistics. We don't charge you for it. Obviously, we pay you a percentage of the revenue generated, and we handle everything. But the trick is that we launch them as crowdfunding campaigns, so they may fail. And a lot of our campaigns fail, and that's okay. It's part of the business model. But essentially, it allows you to test out a product and a market, which influencers really enjoy because, again, they have this really, really interesting dynamics.
What kind of products are we talking about here? Like digital products, physical products?
Oh, we mostly do plush toys. I know it's audio only. I'm holding a plush toy right now.
Okay.
But yeah, we mostly do plush toys. It's one of our main products. We're going to launch 2 more products soon. And the reason it's plush toys is not random. I actually joined the company a little bit later. I joined it after a year. Rakan is my co-founder and CEO. He was working a lot with influencers and kind of like launching every imaginable product. And one of the main things that I did when I joined Makeship was to focus us. So we went from 40 products we were offering to 1. And the reason for that is that it's a lot easier to scale when you have a single type of product. And that's what our main focus is right now. But that's mostly based on the type of creators that we work with.
Okay. So you make plush toys. That's not where I was thinking. It's not where I was heading. And it's also confusing to me that you've got influencers and video studios. I'm even rubbing my eyes trying to wrap my head around the model because you're going to get me there to walk me through this even deeper. By the way, what's interesting though about plush toys is I'm seeing that everyone who's seemingly launching NFTs art on the art side seems to be doing something with the plush toys as well. They're almost doing like you get a toy and the actual digital art piece. Was that somehow part of the tie-in here or no?
No, that happened as a happy coincidence. I think that plush toys though have a interesting history in the markets. You have companies like Beanie Babies that grew tremendously as a result of selling plush toys. Plush toys are very personalized and very customized, but they're also extremely difficult to make, very high barrier of entry. So I think they have the right dynamics to be a starter product for us.
Give me an example then of do you have a specific influencer or a video game company or something that is doing the plush toys, and how are they doing it and for who's buying them?
Yeah, I mean, there's many. We work mostly with, I would call it kind of like the top 1% of influencers, but not the top 0.001%. So we don't work with like maybe names that you might recognize, unless maybe you're a fan of like StarCraft or Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. We have worked with creators that either work in those worlds or with those companies themselves. We've worked with Blizzard Activision, which is one of the largest video game publishers in the world. But we mostly work with like, smaller creators. You're talking 100,000 to 500,000 subscribers types that make relatively niche content. But that's exactly what we love about them. That their audience really understands their characters and who they are, as opposed to the mainstream. Like the more mainstream you go, I would say it does dilute the fandom, versus if you create extremely niche content, then you may get people that are very passionate about your content.
So I don't know if these 2 companies even exist anymore, but Mainframe Entertainment or Radical Entertainment, I think were 2 companies out of Vancouver that did like video games and stuff more for kids. It seems like you're even more niche than that, where you're going into.
Yes. We work with very, very hyper specific niches. Again, I think that's where the internet is going too, though. Like if you think of TikTok, you cannot even choose the content.
The long tail is very, very big.
Exactly. Every time you go down by a third, let's say from 100,000 to 30,000 subscribers, you multiply the amount of creators that are in that space by like 6 or 7-fold. Most of the revenue and most of the creators are at the very top, and everyone's fighting for them. And we said, why fight for that market when there's this like super interesting, super passionate market right behind that we'd rather work with?
And you're taking a percentage of revenue?
Yeah, exactly. We take a percentage of revenue.
So are you also then operating as a bit of an affiliate marketing company for these businesses as well, in a way?
Yeah, kind of in a way. Like if you look at what we did with Blizzard Activision, we were working with their intellectual property called StarCraft, which is a game I used to play as a kid. So I love that we're doing that. When you look at that deal and what we did there, we didn't launch the plush toy exactly just with Blizzard. We launched it with one of the YouTubers that uses Blizzard IP called Carbot. So Carbot makes animations of StarCraft characters, but you still need the StarCraft, obviously, license. So you kind of just do it. And that was kind of like an affiliate type deal because you have an extra player. You have Blizzard, you have the content creator, you have Makeship. There's a little bit more interesting things there where we could potentially do deals with like large IP companies, and then any influencer that uses their IP could potentially work with us. That's something that we're looking at. But normally we don't do affiliate, but it's a possibility, and it's something that could be interesting.
Well, and when I say affiliate, I mean it with the highest respect too. Like one of my former clients and one of the founding members of our COO Alliance, they do the affiliate marketing for Target and Uber and Apple. And, affiliate marketing is just partnership marketing. It's performance-based marketing.
Exactly.
It's just I think it's been given a bad name when you think about Commission Junction and Linkshare and Be Free and places that did it in the schlocky way. And I have another client of mine called Giddy Up that does some pretty massive affiliate marketing where they take all the risk, but similar to kind of what you're doing. I just like the niche. How many employees have you guys got?
We're close to 70. We were like 2 people at the beginning of 2020. So it was quite a bit of growth. And again, we did all of that mostly without fundraising. We fundraised the smallest amount just to get like some strategic people in, but by no means we're based on that. We're really focused on good unit economics.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the growth, and you've also mentioned crowdfunding 2 or 3 times. So I want to understand that. So why don't we start with the crowdfunding, and then we'll go into how you scaled the business, because growing from 2 to 70 people in 2 years is really rough. It's tough to do. Maybe it was easy for you guys. So on the crowdfunding side, how are you building that into your model, and how are you leveraging and using crowdfunding?
What's really interesting about us is that when we make a product, right, when we make a plush toy like the one I'm holding right now, we make a single one. There's just one in the world. And we send that to the influencer. So this influencer has 1 out of 1 in the entire world. And that's all there is. And that influencer shares with their audience what they design with us. And then they have 21 days to hit a target of at least 200 units. If they don't hit that, we refund everyone. And the one-on-ones remains the one-on-one in the world. But if they pass 200 units, we manufacture whatever amount. If we make 372, we make 372. Ship 372 around the world. Give you a badge on your profile that tells you if you're like 1 out of 372 or number 2. And that's all there is. And we don't make it again, at least not right now. So that means that the creator created this like unique product and it's gone. And we don't have inventory and we don't focus on that. And then we carbon offset the production and the shipping of that product as well. And that's it. That's all that exists. It's hyper efficient. But what that allows us to do is grow like a software company, because we get all the problem of a hardware company is that you're always making too little or too much of the product. You have to make it and then sell it, and we get all the money up front instead, and then we produce it. So we always know that we're going to be able to make it and hit the target.
Are you doing any of these plush toys for companies, for brands at all?
No, not right now. And I think that we're not a great model for them. Like if you're a more mature company, you can really predict how many units you're going to sell. And at that point, just make that.
Yeah, I like your model. Is really intriguing. It's funny. The reason I asked, years ago at 1-800-GOT-JUNK, we purchased 500,000 little miniature 1-800-GOT-JUNK trucks that we then gave out to all of our franchisees, and they gave out to all the little kids. And we didn't realize, like, do you know how much warehouse space 500,000 trucks takes up? We had
no idea.
Neither did we. It was a full tractor trailer of tiny little 1-inch by 2-inch trucks. All right. So on the growth from 2 to 70 employees, how did you execute on that? What mistakes did you make and learn along the way? What did you do well?
It's actually really tricky, right? Because at first you're gonna mind that again, when you're like sub 10, everyone is kind of like doing a lot of different things. And then eventually you have to like specialize. There's some people that don't do well in specializing. There's some people that are very creative, but are not very good at managerial. So you have all these employees that were really good before, and then they were like out of the water. Or the opposite also happens, where maybe they felt a little bit uncomfortable before, and then they fit perfectly with their roles. But essentially, it's not, you're just not adding people. You're also changing the dynamics of each person, right? When you're 10 people, you can have a meeting where you meet everyone every morning and talk about what you're gonna do that day. But obviously, you cannot do that at 70 people. I learned a lot of things about how to communicate. I'm still learning those things. I'm learning a lot of things about how to create lattices around like, what does it mean to be an executive or a director? Because those words are meaningless when you're like very few people, but become increasingly important as you grow. You learn how to properly share information. That's a tricky one that I didn't expect to get that hard. At first, when you have like 3 people, when you communicate to one person in the company and you're 3 people, you communicate like, those 2 people are like 70% of the communication already happened. But as you add more dots, there's more potential lines. Exactly. Yep. So there's no way that you can figure out what everyone is saying. So it's like, how do you control information? How do you control where everyone is? So yeah, you have to think about like, how are people gonna advance in their roles? Where are they best positioned? Who do you need to hire? That gets super tricky too, because you're also hiring people that are better than you, obviously. How do you hire a software developer that is like 10 times or 100 times better than you? It's like, because anything you ask them is kind of like, not super efficient. So you're hiring a lot of people that are better than you. That's super tricky. You have to get a lot of advice from mentors. You have to ask a lot of people that grew those companies before you what to do. Because I don't know what you would do if you're the first one. Like, I have no idea how, again, going back to, you talked a little bit about Microsoft. Microsoft and Apple grew at a time where there was not a lot of like venture capital. It's a very new concept. So nobody had seen companies growing that quickly ever. I have no idea how they were able to perform, because that to me is so insane, because I rely so much on other people.
You talked about the sharing of information. I used to say that when there were 2 people talking, one person could talk to one could talk to the others, 2 forms of communication. When you add a third, it's 6, because and then so the complexity grows, as you mentioned. What also starts to grow though is conflict, politics, the silos, the kind of turf wars. Are you getting to that stage now at the 70 people where you're having to grapple with
not too much?
Not yet.
We're a little bit protected because the whole company is remote. So there's a lot of like nasty interactions that just don't happen. Most nasty interactions are because you can't get out of it. Like you're trapped and someone's pressuring you and making you react emotionally, and a nasty situation may occur. Those don't really happen online as much because you have a quick exit or you just don't join that. So there's more passive ways to stop that. So, but as a result, I think you're also less efficient as a company. So it's a weird trade-off. No, I don't think that we've gotten too bad there, or maybe I'm just unfamiliar and unaware. Maybe it's happening all the time and I don't know because I don't see it.
I think there's might be a little bit of both, but I think you are right. I'd never even considered that before, but you do have an out. When you're online and conflict is there, you've got the rest of the day to decompress, and you don't see the jerk 17 more times in the office all day. He's not sitting or she's not sitting across from you or having lunch with you. That's really interesting. And I think you're very right on that. The growth in building a remote team, I mean, the days of that, not happening are way behind us now. Everyone's remote. We're all moving towards remote. Any lessons on, because you built your entire company from the beginning that way, any lessons on what you've done well and what you would do differently in building the remote teams?
I have a lot of thoughts on remote. At the beginning of 2020, you really couldn't buy a book on like how to build a super fast growing startup remotely, because people were still like going to San Francisco, and it was like really, really important to be local to wherever tech scene you were part of, and being very connected physically. I think that you have to be very careful about who you hire in terms of culture fit when you're working remote. One of the definitions of culture is, what do employees do when nobody's looking? Or how do you act in gray areas? And that's kind of key here when it comes to like remote hires. You have to really nail who you hire. So you have to be extra careful around the culture component, because you have to trust when people are at home what they're doing. We don't micromanage, but it's especially impossible to micromanage remotely. bad hires that we've done or bad decisions we've made were around like maybe having not focused enough on culture or not having described the position well enough, which again is very difficult when you're growing really quickly because you don't even know really what you need that much. I think what I've learned is like be really, really specific about what the activity is and the person, and be very specific about your culture and your culture fit, and take your time. Say no to a lot of people, like we say no to 99.5% of the people that want to work with us. So you just really want to get the 0.1 or 0.5% of applicants. If that, you want to really put very strong culture fit guidelines or rules.
How have you funded the business to this point?
Mostly through revenue. We did a tiny pre-seed just again strategically to get really, really cool partners that we work with. But over 99% of the money flowing into the company is revenue. So
wow.
Yeah,
it's unheard of these days for a company,
especially for hardware companies.
Yeah, it's smart. Okay, talk to me a little bit about. I mean, as you mentioned, it's really, really hard to make a plush toy at all, let alone to build an entire business around it where you're not even really sure, and you're only going to do it once. Where are you manufacturing? And if it's Asia, as I would guess, or how are you dealing with the complexities that COVID and shipping have thrown into us? How do you manage logistics?
Long story short, my co-founder, he's Syrian Canadian. He decided he really wanted to learn Mandarin, so he moved to China for a year. He stopped. As one would. He took a year of sabbatical off of Queens, and then he decided to start a business where he would help companies in the West manufacture products in China. And he's actually very fluent in Mandarin now. It's very impressive. And he started this company with this other partner we have, whose name is Kevin Wang Tao. Wang Tao and him started a company called Rhino Manufacturing that manufactured a lot of products, including plush toys. And they learned, at first they would go visit factories and they bought 500 umbrellas and they couldn't sell a single one, and they were trying all these different tactics to learn how to work with manufacturers and products and distribution and shipping, and they learned a lot through that, and they grew the company to 30 people. And Makeship happened as a result of observing the power influencers had with their audiences and how many of them really couldn't afford to make products even though they had purchasing power. It's what's interesting on influencers. It's they themselves couldn't get into inventory because, again, they don't know how many units they're going to sell and how it's going to perform, but they do have an ability to perform. By launching it as crowdfunding, you can launch 100 campaigns and then the top 10 are going to perform extraordinarily well. The influencers never expect that. So in a way, we're kind of like venture capital in that way. But going back to your question about how to manufacture and all the problems of logistics, you have to be constantly looking at how much fabric to buy and how much material to get. It's tricky. There's been some decisions that we had to get very clever at. For example, we started being able to have the ability to make glow-in-the-dark or use glow-in-the-dark fabric, but it's very expensive. They told me, Pablo, you have to buy at least a kilometer squared of this material, and it's gonna be very expensive. So $10,000, and we're not that big. So I'm like, oh shit, what do we do? So we decided, okay, what if all our influencers want to repeat their product all the time because we never make it again, and they're like, Pablo, I want to make it again. I'm like, it has to be slightly different. So I called our top 10 influencers and I said, listen, I'm gonna launch this event where all of you are gonna use glow-in-the-dark fabric and you get to repeat the design that you had before. And a lot of them committed to that. So I was able to buy the kilometer squared and then launch the product, and that was very successful. And again, because we only launched the product as a crowdfunding campaign, I didn't have to buy that material ever again until the next year. So something that protects us is buying the material, using it, and then the product is gone.
Right.
So again, our model protects us a little bit from that. But in terms of shipping, we've increased our prices tremendously because shipping has gone, it's crazy. It's very, very expensive.
I have a feeling you're going to blow my mind here in a second, but when these influencers are selling these plush toys, what's the average target price they're selling something for?
We sell our products on average, I think $28.99 is our average price. And the average campaign probably makes about $30,000 or something like that in terms of total revenue.
So it's really not big.
No, it's not. It's very small.
It's the long tail is just really big.
Exactly.
Super intriguing.
What's nuts about Makeship right now is that we're producing 1,000 products with a company of 70 people. We produce more than 10 products per person in a company. Yeah. So we have to be extremely good at designing.
Do you need to scale the team at this point, or can you operate with the team you have and just scale now from there? WhatsApp, I think, sold for
That's a great question.
$1 billion
Yeah.
with 55 people.
Exactly. It's like, how can we separate our growth from our expenses? Yeah, that's the next stage for Makeship. It's like, because we're about to go to even smaller creators than the ones we work with, which we work, around 50,000 subscribers is probably around the smallest size we work with. And we're about to go down to 25,000. So even more volume, even more campaigns, even more designs. And how do you do that without hiring 1 million people just to keep costs afloat? Yeah, the answer, a lot of that is like extremely good pipelines and technology and libraries. You don't want to redesign the wheel. So if you already made a product, you have to like really keep track of that product so that you can grab elements from it in the future or something like that. Yeah, that's the next stage for us. Is we want to be able to double or triple without significantly growing employee count, probably adding another 50% of people to add another 200% of revenue. So yeah, the answer right now is technology, and the work has to be done. So either the work has to be done by you, by computers, or by your customers, like self-onboarding and like clicking. So we're going to use all the tricks in the book. So you optimize your own work, make sure that you're only doing the things that you have to do. Pass to your customers some of the work, like they have to fill out their name. Like things like that are actually crucial.
Sure.
And make sure you're relying on technology and computers.
Yeah, technology and computers for sure. I want to go back to the 21-year-old, 22-year-old Pablo. You're graduating from Waterloo in Canada, and you're going to start off on your business career. What advice would you give the 21 or 22-year-old that you know to be true today?
I think going back to your first question, actually, which is like, I wish I was stricter about product market fit, and as a result, I was more confident to say no to bad customers. I wish I was better at iterating product so I could find product market fit, because once you really hit product market fit, the dynamics change completely. Instead of trying to like bend my backwards and going one direction, which again, it's useful to some degree to grow the customer. But if you're going too specific, you're not going to capture more customers at volumes. That lesson, it took me too many years.
You just got to make it easier for them to say yes.
Exactly. Make it easier for them to say yes.
Pablo Eder, the COO and co-founder for Makeship. Thanks so much for sharing with us on the Second in Command podcast.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Have a nice day.
My driver has been sort of being that savior, having that savior complex, and really helping people who need the help, that underdog. I want to go in as soon as I hear that they're not doing well. And sometimes that's not the right thing to do when it comes to your team. Sometimes they need to figure things out. Being there and doing everything for them is not necessarily the best solution.